True mastery doesn't come from trying to control the world around you. It comes from mastering the world within yourself. Imagine if, instead of waiting for life to hand you what you think you deserve, you decided today to take full ownership of every choice, every action, every single moment. Picture how different your life would be a year from now if you stopped giving away your power to circumstances or other people. If you're tired of drifting aimlessly, it's time to grab the wheel. Subscribe not just to this channel, but to your own discipline, your own clarity, your own growth. Every step you take towards self-mastery brings you closer to becoming the person you were truly meant to be, and that journey begins now. Many people like to believe that success is reserved for the gifted. It's comforting to think that some people are born with something special that the rest of us simply can't reach, that their lives are written in the stars while ours wander in the dust. But look closer, and you'll see that belief is just an illusion. It's a story we tell ourselves to excuse our lack of effort. The Stoics would remind us that talent alone is far less powerful than discipline, and discipline is something anyone can develop. A rare seed, no matter how valuable, will never grow if it isn't planted in fertile soil and watered consistently. The same is true for you. The potential you admire in others isn't magic. It's effort piled upon effort, day after day, often in silence when no one is watching. What makes this illusion so dangerous is how easily it becomes a cage. When we convince ourselves that talent is destiny, we surrender before the battle even begins. Think about how many times you've looked at someone's success and told yourself, they're just lucky, they're just gifted. That thought feels safe, doesn't it? Because if success is only about natural ability, then you don't have to hold yourself accountable for the work you haven't done. You don't have to confront why you've avoided the discomfort of discipline. But every time you choose that excuse, you trade the possibility of growth for the temporary comfort of surrender, and comfort has never created greatness. Seneca once said, "Luck is what happens when preparation meets opportunity." What he meant is simple. Those who seem lucky are often the ones who prepared relentlessly for years while the rest of the world looked the other way. Carl Jung believed that each of us carries far more inside than we ever allow ourselves to see. He wrote, "Your vision will become clear only when you can look into your own heart. If you wait for proof that you're capable before taking action, you will wait forever." Clarity doesn't come first. Action does. Once you start, once you embrace the grind, once you apply discipline, your vision sharpens. The illusion of talent fades, and you realize that what you once thought was unattainable wasn't missing. It was simply neglected, waiting to be cultivated. Every person you admire started uncertain, flawed, and ordinary. The difference is that they refused to quit. Consider the craftsmen who built cathedrals that took generations to complete. Most never lived to see the finished masterpiece. They laid one stone at a time, trusting that the act of building itself was more valuable than recognition. That is what discipline looks like in practice. You don't measure your worth by how naturally gifted you are on day one. You measure it by how many times you return to the work. Even when no one claps, even when progress is slow. Epictetus taught that no one is free who is not master of themselves. True freedom isn't about waiting for a talent you may never possess. It's in mastering the choices you make every day, especially the small ones. So ask yourself, do you really lack talent, or have you simply refused to nurture what you've been given? Each time you dismiss yourself, saying you aren't naturally gifted, you water the weeds of doubt while starving the seeds of your potential. There is no one alive without something worth cultivating. The difference is who chooses to nurture it with relentless action. Rise early to practice your craft. Persist through boredom and failure. Refuse to quit when results take time to show. What others call natural talent will grow inside you, and you will know the truth. It was built, not born. The illusion of talent keeps people small. It whispers, you can't. Others were chosen, and you weren't. Look deeper, and you'll see that those who rise aren't the most gifted. They are the most disciplined, the most consistent, the ones willing to pay the daily price of effort. The world will always celebrate results and call it talent, but if you choose the harder path, you will know it was forged through discipline, sharpened through resilience, and sustained by the decision not to stop. Maybe that is the ultimate test. The question isn't whether you were born with talent. The question is whether you are willing to nurture what you have until it becomes more than enough. Greatness isn't a gift, it's a responsibility. When you embrace that responsibility, what once felt like limitation transforms into the very challenge that teaches you growth. Accountability is easy to talk about when life feels calm. It sounds noble, inspiring, and strong. But when the alarm rings before dawn, when the day's tasks stretch endlessly before you, when nobody sees your effort or applauds, that is when the true weight of accountability is revealed. In those quiet, unseen moments, the shine of the word fades. What remains is the raw question: will you follow through on the promises you whispered to yourself in easier times? Real accountability isn't glamorous. It isn't a motivational quote or a burst of energy from a speech. It's the grind of showing up when it's simpler not to. It's the discipline of carrying a burden no one else can carry for you. That heaviness is why so many people talk about accountability but never practice it. It's uncomfortable because it strips away excuses and leaves only the work. You can no longer tell yourself, "I didn't have time," or "I wasn't given the chance," when the mirror looks back and asks plainly, "Did you do what you said you would do?" Marcus Aurelius captured it with piercing simplicity. Waste no more time debating what a good man should be. Be one. In the same way, waste no more time arguing about what accountability should look like. You either act or you don't. You either honor your word or you betray it. There is no in-between. And yet, this weight is not meant to break you. It is meant to strengthen you. Think of lifting heavy stones. At first, the effort feels unbearable, almost punishing. But over time, the very act of carrying those stones builds the muscle that makes the next one lighter. Accountability works the same way. Every small act of follow-through, whether it's completing the workout you didn't want to start or sending the report you promised, builds a deep, unshakable trust in yourself. You begin to see that your word has weight, and that realization quietly changes everything, because once you know you can depend on yourself, you stop waiting for permission from anyone else. Still, accountability feels heavy for a reason. It demands more than mere action. It demands honesty. To be accountable means you cannot hide behind appearances. It requires admitting where you fell short without disguise and choosing to try again. Seneca warned that most men are not truly free because they live for the opinions of others. Accountability frees you from that trap. It forces you to care less about applause and more about integrity. Do you act because it's right or only because someone is watching? That question cuts deep because it forces you to examine your motives, and it is in that examination that real growth begins. Carl Jung once wrote, "Who looks outside dreams, who looks inside awakes." Accountability is looking inside with unflinching eyes. It is the daily awakening to the fact that you are responsible for your actions, your choices, your time. That awakening can sting because it strips away the comforting illusion that circumstances or other people are holding you back. But at the same time, it gives you back your power. If you are responsible, you also hold the power to change. The heaviness of accountability is tied to its solitude. When you stand accountable, you often stand alone. Others may not understand why you push yourself when no one demands it. They may not see the purpose of quiet sacrifices, the hours spent practicing, the discipline maintained when it seems unnecessary. But that solitude is not weakness. It is the ground where character is forged. Socrates once said, "The unexamined life is not worth living." Accountability is examination in action. It is the ongoing process of testing whether your choices align with the life you claim to want. And though lonely, this process builds a foundation that cannot be shaken. Over time, accountability transforms from weight into freedom. At first, it feels like chains binding you to commitments no one else sees. Slowly you begin to understand that those chains are made of your own discipline, and they hold up the structure of your life. Without them, everything collapses. With them you can stand firm no matter how violent the storm. So when accountability feels heavy, remember that heaviness is the point. You cannot grow strong without resistance. You cannot build trust in yourself without testing it. Accountability doesn't exist for easy days when motivation carries you forward. It exists for the days when motivation is gone, when fatigue sets in, when no one will notice whether you succeed or fail. Those are the moments that define you, not because anyone is watching, but because you are. The truth is, accountability will always feel burdensome until you realize it is also a gift. It is quiet proof that your life belongs to you. And while it may weigh heavily at times, that very weight shapes you into someone unbreakable. The question that remains is simple and piercing: when no one is watching, when applause has faded, when it is only you and the choice in front of you, will you still act? Imagine sitting across from someone you deeply respect, a mentor, a guide, the kind of person whose judgment matters because they live the life you aspire to. Now imagine laying out your entire week before them, hour by hour, choice by choice. No filters, no excuses, no explanations, just the raw truth of how you spent your time. Would you hold your head high, confident that your actions match your ambitions? Or would you feel the sting of shame shrinking under the quiet realization of how much of your life was given away to distraction, to delay, to things that truly don't matter? This is the mirror test. It is not about judgment from others, but about whether you can face yourself without flinching. Time is life's most valuable currency, and yet it is the one resource we squander most carelessly. Seneca wrote, "It is not that we have a short time to live, but that we waste much of it." The mirror test forces you to ask whether you have been a faithful steward of that resource or a reckless spender. Every hour you waste is not just time gone, it is life gone, and once it slips away, it never returns. Most people think accountability is merely about sticking to tasks or achieving goals, but in reality, it begins much deeper. It begins with recognizing that your time is your life, and how you spend it reveals what you truly value. The unsettling truth of the mirror test is that it allows no hiding behind your words. It does not care about your intentions or the promises you made to yourself. It reflects only what you actually did. If you said you wanted to get healthier but spent the evening endlessly scrolling, the mirror will not lie. If you claimed you wanted to build a business but poured your hours into entertainment, the truth becomes undeniable. Carl Jung once said, "You are what you do, not what you say you'll do." That line cuts straight through every illusion. The mirror test is where your actions either match your vision or reveal the gap between who you claim to be and who you really are. This is why the test feels so heavy. We are experts at justifying our choices, bending the truth to feel comfortable. We tell ourselves that rest is deserved when it is actually avoidance. We tell ourselves tomorrow will be different, only to repeat yesterday's mistakes. But the mirror accepts no excuses. It reflects only reality. That reflection can bring pride or discomfort. Both are valuable. Pride encourages you to continue. Discomfort forces you to change. Imagine for a moment having to explain every decision of your day to someone you deeply respect. Would you be comfortable admitting, "I spent 3 hours lost in meaningless distraction," or "I gave up when it got difficult"? The thought stings, and that sting is precisely the point. Epictetus taught, "First say to yourself what you would be, and then do what you have to do." The mirror test is nothing more than holding your life up to that standard. Are you doing what is necessary to become the person you claim you want to be? And yet, the mirror is not there to condemn. It exists to awaken you. Seeing wasted hours does not mean you are broken. It is a guide showing where improvement is needed. It is a reminder that every day presents a fresh chance to redirect your energy. Marcus Aurelius reminded himself constantly that his time was short and that each day could be his last. To him, this was not a reason for despair, but for urgency. To see carelessness in your hours is not the end. It is the beginning of transformation. This practice requires courage. It is not easy to see yourself clearly. Most people avoid it through constant distraction because silence brings uncomfortable truths. But in that silence, direction is found. As you take the mirror test seriously, the hours you once wasted begin to weigh differently, knowing you will face them in reflection. Gradually you become more intentional. You begin to ask yourself, if I had to justify this moment, would I feel proud or embarrassed? That simple shift can transform how you live, not because others are watching, but because you are. The mirror is always there, silent, unrelenting. So, how much of your life do you let slip away unnoticed? That question is not meant to haunt you, but to remind you of the gift you've been given. Time is limited, fragile, sacred. When you honor it, you honor yourself. The mirror test is heavy because it strips away illusion, but it is freeing because it brings clarity. With clarity comes strength, the strength to align who you are with who you want to become. Excuses are some of the most convincing lies we tell ourselves, masked as reason. I don't have time. I don't have support. I don't have resources. On the surface, these statements sound rational, even responsible. But when you strip away the illusion, strip them down, excuses are all the same, a desperate attempt to escape the weight of responsibility. They allow us to feel justified in doing less, while still clinging to the illusion that we intended to do more. The problem is that excuses may protect comfort in the short term, but they quietly steal the life we could have lived. Excuses are seductive because they shift the blame outward. They make us believe that our stagnation is caused by outside forces rather than our own choices. But look closely, and you'll see the pattern they create, a pattern of giving away your power. Every time you say, "I can't," you hand over control of your life to something beyond yourself. Little by little, you start to believe that you cannot shape your future. Marcus Aurelius reminded himself daily that true power lies over the mind, not in outside events. Realize that and you find strength. Excuses deny that truth. They convince you the problem is always out there, when the solution has always been inside. What makes excuses so dangerous is that they don't just delay action, they become part of your identity. The more you repeat them, the more you believe them. You convince yourself that you are too busy, too unsupported, too underprepared. Eventually, you stop questioning whether these claims are true. You live by them as if they were laws written into your life. This is the subtle prison of excuses. You build the bars, you lock the door, and then you complain about being trapped. The reality is that everyone has reasons not to act. Everyone faces obstacles, responsibilities, and moments of weakness. What separates those who grow from those who stay stuck is not the absence of obstacles, but the refusal to let excuses define them. Excuses thrive in comparison too. We look at others and think, they had better opportunities, they had more support, they started with more talent. Perhaps some of that is true. But the Stoics remind us that life is not about what you start with, it is about what you do with what you have. Socrates taught that he who is not content with what he has will never be content with what he wants. Waiting for perfect conditions before you act is an illusion. There is no perfect moment. There is only now, and the choice to act or avoid. Consider the hours lost to excuses. How many dreams delayed because you told yourself the timing wasn't right? How many opportunities slipped away because you convinced yourself you weren't ready? Every excuse feels harmless in the moment, but over time they accumulate into regret, and regret is nothing more than the voice of accountability ignored too long. The mirror of your life does not reflect intentions, it reflects actions. Excuses cannot appear there, only the absence of action. The challenge is to see excuses for what they truly are, thieves of your time, energy, and potential. Once you name them, they lose some of their power. They stop sounding logical and begin to sound like avoidance. In that moment, you reclaim something vital, the ability to choose differently. It will never feel easy. Excuses will always whisper because the path of action is uncomfortable. But discomfort is not your enemy, it is your teacher. The Stoics embraced discomfort to grow stronger, to test themselves, to prove that character does not rely on ease. When you stop listening to excuses, obstacles cease to be reasons to quit and instead become opportunities to rise. Slowly, the very weight that held you back transforms into the resistance that builds your strength. Next time you hear yourself say, "I don't have time," or "I don't have support," pause. Ask yourself if those words are truth or fear in disguise. Excuses, no matter how convincing, do not protect you. They rob you. They steal the life you could have lived, the potential you could have realized, the future you could have built. Deciding to stop believing them is the moment you reclaim your power. There is a subtle but crucial distinction that people often overlook, one that determines whether you move forward or remain stuck: the difference between shame and disappointment. Shame whispers that you are broken, that something is inherently wrong, that you will never be enough. Disappointment, on the other hand, simply signals that you fell short this time. Shame is heavy and paralyzing. Disappointment, while uncomfortable, can ignite growth. Yet most of us confuse the two, punishing ourselves when we should be learning, drowning in self-pity when we should be adjusting our course. The Stoics remind us that mistakes are not proof of worthlessness, they are opportunities to refine character. Marcus Aurelius wrote, "If you are distressed by anything external, the pain is not due to the thing itself, but to your estimate of it, and this you have the power to revoke at any moment." Shame takes a mistake and interprets it as evidence of inadequacy. Disappointment takes the same mistake and interprets it as a lesson. The event is unchanged. Your judgment determines whether you crumble or grow stronger. Think of a child learning to walk. They fall, stumble, and cry. No one shames them for falling. The fall is not proof they are broken. It is proof they are learning because they are not crushed. By shame, they rise and try again. Eventually, they walk, run, and explore the world. Now consider how harshly we treat ourselves as adults. One failure, one missed opportunity, one rejection, and we collapse into shame, convincing ourselves the fall proves we are unworthy. But what if we treated ourselves with the same patience we give a child? What if we allowed disappointment to guide us forward, instead of letting shame chain us to the ground? Carl Jung wrote, "I am not what happened to me, I am what I choose to become." Shame keeps you trapped in the past. Disappointment opens the door to what is still possible. This distinction is vital. Confuse shame with accountability, and you punish yourself instead of growing. The Stoic path is not self-condemnation, it is self-examination. You do not deny your mistakes, but you also do not inflate them beyond their measure. You observe them clearly, ask what they reveal, and then decide what you will do differently next time. Disappointment, in this sense, is a form of hope. To feel disappointed means you still care, that you still hold a vision for something better. Shame, however, robs you of that vision. It convinces you that no matter what you do, the outcome will always be the same, and so you stop trying. Epictetus said, "It is not what happens to you, but how you react to it that matters." Shame locks your reaction in despair. Disappointment, met with courage, sharpens your response and prepares you to act with greater wisdom. Of course, disappointment can still sting. Falling short of your own expectations hurts deeply. Yet the Stoics embraced that sting as a tool. Pain is information. It highlights where to focus, what to improve, and what requires change. Shame numbs you, telling you not to try because failure is inevitable. Disappointment keeps you awake. It reminds you that you are capable of more. It fuels the relentless pursuit of a better self. This is why high achievers often live with a quiet, persistent sense of disappointment. They hold themselves to high standards, constantly measuring where they could improve. But rather than letting awareness become shame, they transform it into fuel. It drives an athlete to train harder after defeat. It inspires an artist to refine their craft after a poor performance. It motivates a thinker to question and explore again after being proven wrong. Disappointment in this way becomes a tool for resilience. Seneca wrote, "A gem cannot be polished without friction, nor a man perfected without trials." That friction is disappointment. It is the resistance felt when you confront the gap between where you are and where you want to be. Shame insists the gap is unbridgeable. Disappointment tells you the gap exists for a reason, giving you the opportunity to learn how to cross it. Without friction, without falling short, without the ache of dissatisfaction, there is no refinement, only stagnation. So the next time you stumble, pause. Ask yourself, am I trapped in shame or am I sitting with disappointment? If you find yourself telling a story that you are broken, incapable, or unworthy, that is shame, and it will keep you immobilized. But if you feel the sting without making it part of your identity, you give yourself permission to move forward. Disappointment says this is not the end. This is feedback. Adjust and try again. The difference is everything. Shame presses you down, disappointment strengthens you as you carry it. And the choice between them lies not in the event itself, but in how you perceive it. Remember, falling short does not mean you are broken. It means you are human. And if you choose to see clearly, every disappointment can become a stepping stone, bringing you closer to the life you were meant to live. Whenever life pushes back, the most powerful action is also the most uncomfortable, asking, "How is this my fault?" At first, the question feels like an attack, as if you are being asked to take responsibility for things that were clearly not your doing. But it is not a weapon meant to break you. It is a tool to reveal where your influence truly lies. It strips away the comfort of blame, denies the easy refuge of pointing outward, and forces you to look inward, where your power always resides. Most people prefer to see themselves as victims of circumstance. It feels easier to say, "This happened because of them," or "The system is unfair," than to examine your role in the outcome. But the moment you shift your focus from external to internal, you reclaim something essential, the ability to change. The Stoics were clear. Epictetus taught, "We cannot choose our external circumstances, but we can always choose how we respond to them." Asking, "How is this my fault?" is another way of asking, "What part of my response could I have controlled but didn't?" Consider a mistake at work, a failed relationship, a missed opportunity. It is tempting to explain it away by highlighting what others did wrong. But if you take that route, you learn nothing, because the power remains in someone else's hands. Instead, ask what you could have done differently. Perhaps you didn't prepare thoroughly enough. Perhaps you avoided a difficult conversation until it was too late. Perhaps you ignored warning signs to avoid discomfort. These realizations sting, but they illuminate the path forward. Blame chains you. Responsibility unlocks growth. Carl Jung wrote, "Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life, and you will call it fate." When you refuse to ask the hard questions, your blind spots run your life. You repeat mistakes and label them bad luck. But when you ask, "How is this my fault?" you shine a light into those hidden corners. You see patterns of avoidance, fear, or weakness quietly shaping your choices. And once you see them, you can no longer pretend you are powerless. The illusion of fate fades, and the reality of choice stands before you. This question feels terrifying because it removes excuses. If your actions always contributed, there is no safe place to hide. That is a hard truth, but also liberating. No hiding place means no cage. You are not doomed to repeat the same cycles. You can adjust, learn, and grow. Of course, this is not about self-blame in a destructive sense. You are not meant to berate yourself for everything that goes wrong. Life brings storms, loss, betrayal, accidents. The point of this question is not to assign guilt where it doesn't belong. It is to discover where your influence could have been greater, where your choices shaped the outcome, and how you might respond differently in the future. Responsibility is not punishment. It is not about fairness. It is about usefulness. Asking how something is your fault is valuable because it reveals where you have the power to act differently next time. The greatest leaders, thinkers, and creators all share this ability. They ask the hard questions. They do not spend years nursing old wounds or blaming others. They ask, "What part did I play? How can I do it differently next time?" This mindset transforms failure from an enemy into a teacher. It turns setbacks into stepping stones along the path forward, rather than detours that leave you lost. So when life strikes, when you lose a job, a relationship fails, or an opportunity slips through your fingers, pause and ask the hardest question, not to punish yourself, but to rebuild yourself with greater wisdom. Ask, what was within my control that I ignored? Where could I have acted differently? What choice did I avoid because it was uncomfortable? The answers are rarely easy, but they are always invaluable. They reveal that even when life feels overwhelming, you are never entirely powerless. In truth, the hardest question is also the most liberating. It challenges you to stop seeing yourself as a victim and start seeing yourself as an active participant in your life. When you accept that role, everything changes. You stop waiting for others to fix your problems. You stop resenting the world for being unfair. You take ownership of both your failures and your future. Slowly, the same question that once terrified you becomes the one that strengthens you. How is this my fault? Taking control of your life is never free. It comes at a cost heavier than most people are willing to pay. Responsibility demands an emotional toll, collected not in money, but in effort, sacrifice, and honesty. It costs your comfort, because comfort thrives in avoidance. It costs your excuses, because excuses dissolve the moment you stand accountable. And it costs the luxury of pointing fingers, because ownership leaves no room for blame. These costs are steep and at times isolating. But the truth is, what you gain far outweighs what you give up. You gain the ability to trust yourself. With that trust, you stop drifting as a passive passenger in your own story. You sit in the driver's seat, fully aware that every choice carries weight. That awareness can feel unsettling at first. Once why? You accept ownership. You can no longer pretend the circumstances of your life are random or controlled solely by others. Every decision becomes meaningful. Every action becomes a vote for the person you are becoming. Marcus Aurelius reminded himself daily that it is not external things that trouble us, but our judgments about them. To own your judgments is to accept that the quality of your life is determined not by the storms around you, but by how you navigate them. And when you take this seriously, excuses lose their charm. You begin to see them for what they truly are, escape routes that lead nowhere. Here lies the paradox. The cost of ownership is heavy, yet without paying it, you bear a weight far heavier. When you refuse ownership, you pay in regret, doubt, and the quiet awareness that you are betraying yourself. The temporary relief of blaming others or hiding behind excuses always returns, compounded by wasted time and lost potential. Seneca wrote, "While we waste our time hesitating and postponing, life is slipping away. Ownership is costly, but hesitation is ruinous. The question is not whether you will pay, it is whether you will pay now in the currency of discipline or later in regret." Carl Jung observed, "The privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are." Ownership is the price of that privilege. To become the person you are meant to be, no one can walk your path for you. No one can carry your burdens, make your decisions, choose your habits. That realization can feel overwhelming, but it also brings clarity. The moment you claim everything as yours, your failures, your flaws, your victories, you understand that the life you want is not waiting for anyone else. It is waiting for you to claim it through deliberate action. The emotional tax of ownership often comes in the form of loneliness. As you hold yourself to higher standards, not everyone around you will match your commitment. Some may mock your discipline. Others may resent your refusal to play the old games of blame and excuses. Ownership demands prioritizing growth over approval. Socrates said, "To find yourself, think for yourself." Ownership means daring to think for yourself, even when it leaves you standing apart. That separation is part of the cost, but it also becomes the source of your strength. Another cost is brutal clarity about your limitations. When responsibility can no longer be pushed onto others, you are forced to see where you have fallen short. This can be painful, but it is also liberating. Only by acknowledging your weaknesses can you begin to strengthen them. Aristotle wrote, "Knowing yourself is the beginning of all wisdom." Ownership is that knowledge in action. It strips away illusion and forces honest self-assessment. And while honesty can wound, it also heals because it gives you the solid ground from which to rise. Over time, you learn that ownership is less about perfection and more about consistency. Control of your life is not seized in one dramatic moment. It is claimed in the small, often invisible choices you make every day. Choosing to finish the task instead of leaving it undone. Choosing to own a mistake instead of covering it up. choosing to improve a little each day rather than waiting for perfect conditions. These choices accumulate, and gradually they transform not only what you do, but who you believe yourself to be. Slowly, you become someone you can trust, someone who keeps their word to themselves. That self-trust is worth more than comfort, more than excuses, more than blame. The cost of ownership never goes away. Every single day you choose it, you pay, in effort, in honesty, in discipline. But in return, you gain a freedom that cannot be taken from you. You gain clarity in your direction, strength in your actions, and pride in your character. You stop being the passive passenger, complaining about the journey, and become the driver steering with purpose and intention. And once you feel that kind of freedom, you realize the price you paid was never a burden. It was an investment. In the end, the real question is not whether ownership is costly, but whether you are willing to trade comfort for potential. The emotional toll is real, but so is the reward. To own your life is to carry weight, yes, but it is also to stand upright beneath that weight, knowing it is shaping you into someone stronger, sharper, and more alive. That is a price worth paying. When you truly begin to hold yourself accountable, something subtle yet profound shifts within you. At first, it is about your own life, waking up when you promised, following through on your commitments, taking responsibility when plans fail. But over time, this discipline reshapes not only how you view yourself, but how you perceive others. You stop tolerating weakness, not to judge or belittle, but because you understand what it costs to rise. You know the weight of responsibility, you know the discomfort of pushing past excuses, you know the discipline it takes to leave comfort behind and pursue growth. Once you have paid that price, avoidance and mediocrity no longer appear the same. It is not judgment, it is recognition. The remarkable truth is that others notice this transformation, often without a word being spoken. When you hold yourself to a higher standard, they feel it. They see it in your actions, your consistency, the quiet way you embody your values. This is why ownership is contagious. It spreads not through lectures, but through example. This is why becoming the standard matters. The world does not shift because we demand more from others. It changes because we demand more from ourselves. When you raise your own standard, the people around you begin to mirror it. A friend starts questioning their own excuses because they see you choosing discipline over distraction. A colleague works harder because your quiet consistency raises the bar. Even within your family, your example sets a tone words alone could never convey. True leadership begins here, not with authority, but with ownership. Of course, becoming the standard carries its costs. People will resist at first, some will criticize, others may distance themselves. Accountability threatens those not ready to face themselves. But the Stoics provide clarity. Epictetus said, "Don't explain your philosophy, embody it. If your standard unsettles others, let it. Your task is not to lower yourself for the comfort of others, but to live in a way that calls them upward. You cannot make anyone rise, but you can refuse to step down." And over time, those who resisted may begin to respect or even follow the path you've chosen. When you take responsibility, when you awaken to your own power, you become more than a person drifting with the crowd. You become a standard, a measure against which others naturally compare themselves. And this does not mean perfection. It means honesty, integrity, and a refusal to abandon the responsibilities that give life meaning. Awakening is not about flawless execution, but about facing life consciously, without excuses or illusions. The more you embrace ownership, the more you see that responsibility is not only personal, it is social. Your actions ripple outward. By living with accountability, you silently grant others permission to do the same. When they observe your consistency, your discipline, your refusal to compromise, they begin to wonder what might be possible if they held themselves to the same standard. In this way, you do not just transform your own life, you begin to reshape the culture around you. Seneca once said, "Associate with people who are likely to improve you. When you become the standard, you embody it for others. You are the presence that uplifts rather than drags down, the example that inspires rather than excuses. And yet, the work never ends. Becoming the standard is not about reaching a point where you are beyond failure. It is about remaining steadfast on the path even when it is hard, even when it feels isolating. The higher your standard, the more you confront your own shortcomings, but that confrontation is part of the journey. It keeps you grounded, keeps you honest, and keeps you moving forward. Aristotle once wrote, "We are what we repeatedly do." Excellence, then, is not a single act but a habit, cultivated daily. Becoming the standard is not a one-time achievement. It is the persistent practice of excellence, expressed in both small and significant ways every day. At its core, this is the essence of ownership. It starts within you, but it does not remain confined there. It radiates into your work, your relationships, your community. It shapes the way others perceive themselves, often without their awareness. If you want a better world, it begins with you, not with speeches, not with demands, but with the quiet, consistent choice to live at a higher level, to hold yourself accountable when no one is watching, to awaken to your own responsibility, and, in doing so, awaken others. Becoming the standard is not about being superior to anyone else. It is about alignment with yourself. It is about living so that your actions speak louder than your words, and your presence draws others toward their own potential. Ownership begins with one person, but once it takes root, it never remains confined. It spreads, inspires, and in time transforms. Ultimately, everything comes down to this: your life is shaped not by what happens to you, but by the ownership you embrace. The moment you stop making excuses and start carrying your own weight, you reclaim your power. That choice is not easy, but it is the only path to freedom, clarity, and strength. Let today be the day you rise to your own standard. Have you ever wondered if what we call love is really just a fear of being alone? What if the need to be with someone is a disguise, a way to avoid confronting the emptiness inside? And what if what we think of as relationships is just another form of escape from ourselves? Nothing is closer to the truth than the discomfort we feel in solitude. The Stoics urged us to imagine our final moments, the room silent, the air thick, the weight of our life pressing down, and to ask, did I live my own life, or did I merely exist in the shadow of someone else? They also warned against surrendering our inner freedom, reminding us that the chains we accept willingly are the hardest to break. We dress these chains in romance, in companionship, in the illusion of completeness, but deep within, something burns. Something whispers that you were meant for more. If you have ever felt that whisper, sensed the hidden truth beneath your relationships, you already know this message is for you. If you seek the courage to face yourself honestly, to build a life rooted in your own strength and sovereignty, consider committing to the version of yourself that refuses to abandon your own soul. Most people do not fall in love from a place of wholeness. They fall because they fear the silence that follows the noise, the kind of silence that forces them to confront thoughts and questions they have been avoiding for years. There is an empty space in their lives, a void too wide, too raw, too echoing, and they fill it with another person, not always because they truly want them, but because it is easier than facing themselves. Much of what we call love is simply a carefully disguised form of avoidance. It is easier to immerse ourselves in someone else's stories, emotions, and needs than to confront our own. Carl Jung once wrote, "Loneliness does not come from having no people around you, but from being unable to communicate the things that seem important to you." For many, a relationship is not a bridge to genuine connection. It is a shield against loneliness, a way to pretend they are understood even when they have never truly understood themselves. The danger is that love rooted in fear becomes fragile. Every argument feels like a threat, every moment of distance like a crack in fragile glass. The relationship is tasked with holding not just two lives together, but the unresolved fragments of each person. When cracks begin to show, panic sets in. People cling harder, compromise their values, silence their desires, and mold themselves into shapes that do not fit. all to prevent the other person from leaving. That is not love. It is survival. It is an attempt to avoid facing the very silence they have been running from. True love, in contrast, demands courage. It does not seek validation or approval at the expense of honesty. Fear-based love collapses under pressure, but love grounded in self-awareness and integrity builds resilience. And yet, this process is subtle and gradual. The compromises start small: where to eat, what to watch, how to spend the weekend. They seem harmless, even natural. But if unchecked, these compromises accumulate, and what begins as partnership can quietly erode the core of who you are. You begin holding back pieces of yourself because you sense they won't be understood. You stop chasing certain dreams because they might create friction. You start adjusting your personality, not because you wish to, but because you fear that expressing your full self might jeopardize the relationship. Gradually, the person you once knew becomes harder to recognize, even to yourself. Marcus Aurelius reminded us, "It is not death that a man should fear, but he should fear never beginning to live." And therein lies the quiet tragedy. So many people cease truly living once fear of losing someone takes hold. When love is built on fear, it prevents the very freedom love is meant to bring. True love should allow you to stand taller, not shrink smaller. It should strengthen your individuality, not erase it. When fear dominates, love transforms into an unspoken contract of limitations. Don't be too much. Don't change too quickly. Don't disrupt the balance, even if that balance suffocates you. People convince themselves this is normal, the price of connection. Yet what they fail to see is that the price is far higher than they realize. They pay with their authenticity, their creativity, their growth, all of it surrendered for the comfort of not confronting themselves. The irony is that the silence they avoid is not their enemy, it is their teacher. In solitude, the external noise fades, and your real voice begins to emerge. At first, it is uncomfortable. Doubts, fears, regrets rise to the surface. But if you endure long enough, you hear your values, your calling, your truth. Jung said, "The privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are. That cannot happen if you are constantly drowning in someone else's presence, when every thought, every word, every action is shaped to maintain peace rather than center yourself." The fear underpinning love is rarely about losing another person. It is about losing the distraction they provide. Remove that distraction, and you are left with yourself. For many, that encounter is the most frightening of all. Yet this is the encounter that changes everything. Once you can sit in your own silence without seeking escape, you no longer rely on others to feel complete. You stop compromising your identity for the sake of connection. You begin to love by choice, not by necessity. This is the kind of love that cannot be broken by distance or absence, because it is not built on fear, it is built on freedom. Choosing to face the silence is not easy. It demands courage to stop reaching for someone simply to avoid confronting yourself. But that courage becomes the foundation of a life in which love is a gift, not a crutch, where being with someone is a conscious decision, not an unconscious escape, where walking away from what does not serve you is an act of self-respect, not indifference. Fear-based love keep you trapped in cycles of avoidance. Facing it sets you free, and freedom, as the Stoics taught, is the one possession no one can take from you. From the moment we first understand words, the story begins. It arrives in bedtime tales, movies, and the ways adults speak of life. We grow up, meet someone, fall in love, settle down. It is painted as the ultimate destination, the final chapter where all loose ends are tied and the credits roll over a happy ending. Few pause to ask what happens after the scene fades to black. Fewer still question whether this script serves everyone or whether it silently robs us of the chance to meet the most important person we will ever know, ourselves. This conditioning does not arrive as a command. It is softer, subtler, insidious. It creeps in through casual questions from relatives. When will you meet someone? As if your life is a waiting room for love. It hides in compliments that compare your worth to your relationship status. By adulthood, the message is no longer questioned, it is absorbed. unquestioned, like gravity. The effect of this quiet programming is profound. Without realizing it, many adults grow up believing life without a partner is inherently incomplete. They travel, learn, build careers, yet an unspoken sense lingers that all of it is filler until they find someone. And so they enter relationships not from readiness or self-awareness, but out of duty to the story they were handed. Carl Jung once wrote, "The most terrifying thing is to accept oneself completely." For many, relationships become a way to avoid that terrifying work. If someone else validates you, you do not have to fully validate yourself. If someone mirrors your value, you need not confront the silence that demands you define it for yourself. This invisible conditioning shapes not only whom you choose, but how you behave within those choices. If you've been taught your worth is linked to partnership, you will often endure harm rather than face the state of being alone. You will ignore red flags, tolerate disrespect, or contort yourself into someone else's ideal to avoid the shame of solitude. Marcus Aurelius observed, "It is not the things themselves that disturb us, but our judgments about them." Here, the judgment is subtle yet crushing. Alone equals failure, together equals success. It is this false measure that traps countless people in lives that do not reflect who they truly are. Notice that this script leaves no room for individuality. It is marketed as universal truth, yet assumes a single path fits all. Some flourish in committed partnerships. Others require long stretches of solitude to grow fully, but conditioning rarely permits that second option. Solitude is reframed as loneliness. Loneliness becomes a problem to be solved urgently, and the pressure doesn't come only from outside. It takes residence inside. Even when no one is watching, you feel restless in your own company, as if you are wasting time by not moving toward that prescribed ending. Over time, this restlessness settles into the background of your existence, becoming a quiet hum that measures the rhythm of your life. You begin to gauge your progress not by how deeply you have come to understand yourself, but by how closely you adhere to the societal blueprint you were handed. The danger of living by this blueprint is that it discourages genuine self-exploration. If the destination is already decided, why stray off the path? Why question whether that endpoint aligns with the person you are becoming? Conditioning tells you that discovering yourself is secondary to finding someone else, and in doing so subtly encourages you to abandon parts of yourself that don't fit neatly into a relationship narrative. You may suppress ambitions, interests, or unconventional ideas because they could make it harder to conform. In this way, the story shapes not only your relationships, but also your identity. Jung often spoke of individuation, the process of becoming your true self, as the central task of life. This journey requires time, solitude, and a willingness to stand apart from the crowd. Yet invisible conditioning pushes the opposite. It insists that you merge, pair off, and tether your life to another's as soon as possible. Here lies the tension. Individuation demands inward focus, while the cultural script pulls your gaze outward. Without realizing it, you may spend decades caught between these opposing forces, pulled away from your own becoming by the gravitational pull of expectation. It's not that love or companionship is wrong. The issue arises when they become compulsory, when pursued reflexively without regard for your readiness, or without considering whether the version of yourself you are cultivating fits the role you are expected to play. Relationships entered under such conditioning often become mirrors of that same conditioning, safe, familiar, predictable, but unchallenging. They may provide comfort, but they will rarely reveal the full truth of who you are. And the tragedy is that by the time you notice, years may have slipped by, leaving the person you could have been distant, almost unreachable. The first step in loosening the grip of this conditioning is awareness, seeing the story for what it is, a story, not an absolute law, changes everything. Once you realize you are free to write your own narrative, the urgency to find someone else begins to fade. Being single is no longer absence, it becomes a rare and expansive opportunity. It is an open field where you can plant ideas, dreams, and facets of yourself that would never survive in the cramped soil of living only for another's approval. The Stoics called this living in accordance with nature, aligning your life with your own inherent nature, not the artificial scripts imposed upon you. Breaking free from invisible conditioning does not mean rejecting love forever. It means refusing to let the fear of solitude dictate your choices. It means committing to know yourself deeply before offering yourself to another. Because when you finally meet someone from a place of wholeness, you will not be seeking to fill a void, you will be inviting them to walk beside you on a path you have already claimed. And that is a connection no conditioning can manufacture, because it arises from freedom, not fear. This transformation does not occur in a single, noticeable moment. It is gradual, almost imperceptible. At first, it begins with minor compromises. You skip something you want to do because it doesn't fit the plan. You soften your opinion in a discussion to avoid friction. You convince yourself that avoiding confrontation is maturity, that love requires meeting in the middle. Initially, these concessions feel harmless, even noble. But over time, the small sacrifices accumulate and the person you were begins to fade. Not because anyone demanded it, but because you surrendered yourself piece by piece, unaware of the cost. The shift is so subtle you scarcely notice it. You adapt to maintain peace, protect a bond, or preserve something you believe you cannot live without. And while compromise is natural in connection, there is a crucial distinction between adapting and erasing. When you filter your thoughts before speaking, when you swallow desires to prevent discomfort, you begin trading authenticity for security. The Stoics warned against this quiet bargain. Seneca wrote, "He who is brave is free." True freedom is the ability to exist fully without constant self-censorship. But when love becomes a stage where you must always rehearse the right lines, freedom slips away quietly, almost unnoticed. This disappearance is difficult to detect because it is often disguised as growth. You tell yourself that you are becoming less selfish, more accommodating, more understanding, and sometimes that is true, yet there is a delicate line between genuine growth and slow diminishment. When the line blurs, you may not recognize which side you are on until it is far behind you. You begin noticing subtle changes. You laugh less freely. You pursue fewer interests that once ignited your spirit. You hesitate before expressing your thoughts and feelings. Alone, these changes seem minor, even acceptable. But together they quietly erode your sense of self, a version of you carefully sanded down to fit someone else's comfort. What makes this erosion particularly insidious is that it is self-imposed. Rarely does anyone demand your disappearance. Instead, you comply in hopes of maintaining connection. You internalize the unspoken belief that love survives by removing your edges, by softening, by becoming agreeable even when it costs something essential. Over months or years, the reflection in the mirror becomes familiar yet distant. You recognize the outline, but the inner fire, the combination of thoughts, desires, and expressions that made you unmistakably yourself, has dimmed. This slow disappearance extends beyond romantic relationships. It can infiltrate friendships, family ties, even workplaces, anywhere the pressure to belong outweighs the courage to stand fully as yourself. Erosion begins. Gradual change feels natural, almost inevitable. You tell yourself that compromise is normal, the cost of connection. Yet a quiet restlessness persists, a reminder of when you once felt fully alive, unfiltered, and unapologetic. The painful truth is that disappearing in this way does not strengthen bonds. It weakens them. Relationships built on partial truths and filtered selves form fragile foundations. You may maintain surface-level peace, but beneath it, resentment grows and intimacy diminishes. Marcus Aurelius reminded us, the soul becomes dyed with the color of its thoughts. If your thoughts are constantly tailored to avoid friction, your soul slowly adopts the muted tones of avoidance, losing the vivid colors that define your uniqueness. Reclaiming yourself is not about swinging to the opposite extreme and rejecting compromise entirely. It is about remembering that love, in its truest forms, romantic, platonic, or self-directed, thrives when both individuals stand whole. It is about recognizing that you can be kind without surrendering your boundaries, loving without silencing your truth. Authenticity may generate tension, but tension is not an enemy. As the Stoics taught, the challenges we face are the training grounds for strength. A relationship that cannot withstand your authenticity is not capable of holding you fully. The slow disappearance is seductive because it feels safe. But safety is an illusion if it comes at the expense of your life force. You are not meant to soften yourself or become palatable just to preserve an idea of love. Love that demands your absence is not love. It is a contract of gradual self-erasure. Recognizing this truth illuminates the path. The greatest gift you can offer any relationship is the fullness of who you are, unshaped by fear, uncut by compromise. Once you stop disappearing, you stop trading your life for another's comfort. You begin living it as it was meant to be lived, whole, present, unmistakably yours. Belonging is one of the deepest human desires. We are wired to seek connection, to feel anchored to a place, a group, or a person. There is comfort in having a home to return to, someone who claims you, a life that feels shared rather than solitary. But the subtle cost of this belonging often goes unacknowledged, particularly when it is not grounded in true freedom. The cost is rarely demanded outright. It emerges as an almost invisible negotiation of your thoughts, desires, and very essence. Over time, you learn which aspects of yourself are acceptable and which should remain hidden. The more you trade away, the safer you feel, yet the more essential parts of you quietly fade. The security of belonging often comes with unspoken rules. Spoken or not, you learn to measure your words, tone down ambitions, and manage raw emotions so as not to disrupt the peace. Gradually, you settle into a mental and emotional middle ground, never too much, never too little, always adjusted to fit the space you occupy. Epictetus warned, if you wish to improve, be content to be thought foolish and stupid. Belonging often erodes this willingness. We choose smoothness over honesty, acceptance over self-expression. Repeated choices like these reshape us. The danger lies in how subtly it masquerades as love. You tell yourself that these compromises are made out of care, out of being a good partner, friend, or family member, and sometimes that is true. But the line separating healthy compromise from self-erasure is narrow. Belonging has a subtle way of nudging you toward the latter, often without your conscious awareness. One day, you wake up to realize you are no longer speaking your mind unless it feels safe. You've stopped pursuing certain dreams because they clash with the shared expectations or the plan of those around you. You've become measured, cautious, less spontaneous, not because you wish to change, but because any deviation threatened the approval you've painstakingly earned. Ned. The cost of belonging isn't always paid in dramatic acts of betrayal or loss. More often, it is settled in small, almost invisible installments. The joke you didn't tell because you weren't sure how it would land. The truth you held back because it could spark conflict. The risk you avoided because explaining yourself to someone who wouldn't understand felt too heavy. Each instance may seem insignificant on its own, yet together they form a pattern. Over time, you find yourself living not for your own clarity or authenticity, but for the stability of the group, the relationship, or the bond you're trying to preserve. You trade fragments of your individuality for a semblance of security, believing that the more you give, the more you will belong. When your thoughts are constantly adjusted to align with the expectations of others, your soul gradually loses its distinct color, choosing to remain single, or simply embracing solitude when necessary allows you to retain ownership of your thoughts, desires, and essence without the perpetual background negotiation. This is not a call for isolation. It is a call for sovereignty. It is the recognition that every decision you make comes from your own center, not from a careful calculation of how it will be received or approved. This is not to say that connection is inherently harmful. Love, friendship, and community can offer profound growth and joy, yet they only serve their true purpose if they allow your full presence. When belonging demands constant self-editing, it is no longer connection, it becomes a subtle form of control. And control, however gently applied, limits your capacity to live fully as yourself. Jung believed that individuation, the process of becoming whole, cannot unfold when your sense of self depends on the approval of others. You cannot integrate the hidden or suppressed parts of yourself if you are constantly bending to belong. Choosing yourself over the comfort of belonging is never easy. It may require standing apart from the group, defying unspoken rules, or releasing relationships that cannot hold your truth. It may bring moments of acute loneliness, sharper than you anticipated, but it also brings liberation, the freedom of living without the burden of constant adjustment, without the slow erosion of your voice and vision. In that freedom, something extraordinary emerges. You begin to belong to yourself in a way no one else can take from you. The cost of belonging is tangible, yet so too is the reward of maintaining your life entirely in your own hands. Choosing to remain single does not mean rejecting love or human connection. It means refusing to barter away your essence for them. It means that when you do choose to belong somewhere, you do so as your whole self, without compromise or self-abandonment. Belonging is at its sweetest when it does not demand that you shrink. And once you claim your freedom, every connection you form becomes richer, more genuine, and more enduring. When you strip away the constant hum of other people's expectations, something unexpected emerges. At first it can be unsettling, a silence that feels almost too loud. Thoughts long buried beneath conversations, obligations, and the steady pull of someone else's presence begin to surface. Ideas you had set aside, feelings you had muted, and dreams you had deferred rise with an intensity that can feel overwhelming, like a neglected room suddenly flooded with revealing light. Carl Jung once wrote, "Who looks outside dreams, who looks inside awakes." Solitude forces that awakening. It asks you to turn inward, to confront the truths and questions you have long avoided. While initially uncomfortable, this inward gaze carries a hidden gift: clarity. As days and weeks unfold, that clarity deepens. Your own voice begins to resonate with precision and authority. Without the constant negotiation of your thoughts to satisfy others, your ideas expand, stretch, and grow in ways that feel genuinely yours. You learn to think, feel, and act from your own center, rather than from the margins of someone else's expectations. And in that space, you begin to reconnect with the person you were always meant to be, the person whose voice, desires, and vision are unapologetically whole. You push further, bolder than before. You begin to follow the paths your mind had long ignored because they didn't align with the shared plan, with the expectations of the group, or the comfort of keeping peace. The world within you begins to widen, expanding into spaces of thought, imagination, and insight you could never access when your energy was spent constantly adapting to someone else's rhythm. This is the dimension of being alone that most people rarely discuss, the way solitude sharpens the mind when there is nothing left to dilute it. At first, being alone can feel like a kind of loss, particularly if you've been conditioned to view it as absence. No partner to share your day, no one to weigh in before you make a decision, no immediate reflection of your words. Yet as you lean into this quiet, you begin to understand that absence has been misinterpreted. What you've truly been given is space, unclaimed, pure, unmeasured space. And space has a way of revealing truths that the noise of constant presence cannot. Marcus Aurelius reminded us, "You have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this and you will find strength." In solitude, this truth becomes impossible to ignore. Validation, direction, and a sense of worth no longer need to be outsourced. They start to emerge from within. The power of that shift is hard to articulate until it has been fully felt. The more time you spend in this inner landscape, the more it transforms you. At first, you might try to fill the silence with noise, music, screens, endless conversation with anyone who will listen. But gradually, you allow the silence to exist. You come to realize that not every thought needs to be silenced or distracted from. The discomfort of stillness is not punishment, but the process of encountering yourself anew. In that stillness, your desires become sharper, more defined. You begin to distinguish which dreams are authentically yours and which were inherited from someone else's vision of life. Forgotten ambitions resurface, long-neglected curiosities pull at you. Solitude shifts slowly from being uncomfortable to being addictive, not because you want to avoid others, but because you've glimpsed the liberation of living without constant compromise. There is a peculiar energy that arises from choosing your own company, from defining your presence on your own terms. This is not the isolation born of rejection, loss, or fear. It is deliberate, chosen, and grounded in self-respect. The Stoics would call this living in accordance with nature, aligning your actions with your internal compass rather than external scripts. You begin to notice how much of your prior life was reactive, tuned to someone else's moods, needs, and expectations. Now, your energy is directed toward creation. You are no longer managing the emotions of others before exploring your own. You no longer temper your excitement, hold back ideas, or suppress thought because it might provoke misunderstanding. Time itself begins to feel different, stretched, open, unhurried. Projects can be pursued until fully realized, ideas followed at midnight, inspiration acted on freely, without explanation or permission. All the energy once spent maintaining balance with others is now yours to invest in what truly matters. Solitude is not a constant stream of clarity or inspiration. There are days when silence feels heavy, when the absence of another person's presence feels acute. Yet even then, the weight carries meaning. It strengthens your capacity to stand alone, to sit fully in your own mind without fleeing. Eventually, the space cultivated by solitude ceases to feel like emptiness and begins to feel like home. You come to understand that the deepest connections, with others, with your work, with life itself, are richest when nurtured from this foundation. Once you have tasted the sharpness of thought, the unfiltered clarity of vision, and the undiluted pull of your own desires, you defend that space fiercely, not as a wall against the world, but as the solid ground upon which you stand unshakable. Belonging fully to yourself is something no absence, no relationship, no external force can take away. From the earliest stories we are told a recurring tale. Somewhere out there exists another person who will complete us. It is woven into fairy tales, movies, and songs. The promise is seductive. You are not whole until you find your other half. At first, this idea feels romantic, comforting, even desirable. It implies that fulfillment cannot be found within, but only through merging with another. Yet hidden beneath that comforting notion is a subtle but dangerous belief: alone you are incomplete. Accepting that belief subtly dictates your life. Every choice begins to orbit the hope of attracting or retaining another person. Ambitions are muted to preserve the bond. Parts of your personality that might challenge the image of the perfect partner are subdued. Slowly your identity begins to reflect not your truth, but what ensures connection. This is not love. It is dependence cloaked as devotion. And dependence, however beautiful its packaging, gradually erodes individuality. It offers a false sense of safety, implying that as long as the other person remains, you remain secure. But that security carries a hidden cost. You begin to measure yourself by how well you fit into someone else's life, suppressing subtle signals from within: dissatisfaction, curiosity, unpursued dreams, because following them might threaten the bond. Epictetus wrote, "If you want to be free, then wish for nothing that depends on others." Freedom cannot thrive in dependence. It diminishes quietly until one day you realize your life is built upon ground that could vanish at any moment. When you accept the myth of incompleteness, relationships cease to be choices and transform into lifelines. Losing someone does not only bring emotional pain, it feels like losing a piece of yourself. That is why many stay in relationships that no longer nourish them, why they silence instincts and ignore needs. They fear that leaving would render them less than whole. The truth, however, is this: you were never half of anything. You have always been an entire person, fully capable of love, creation, and purpose, without needing to fuse with another. The wholeness you seek cannot come from someone else, it can only be built from within. Where does this belief originate? Partly, it is cultural. Society glorifies the couple, the family unit, as the pinnacle of personal achievement. Singleness is framed as a waiting room, a temporary state to be escaped. Language reflects this bias. Terms like settling down suggest that only through partnership can life be complete. But this narrative is flawed. Partnership does not guarantee fulfillment, and singleness is not a sentence of lack. Marcus Aurelius observed, "Very little is needed to make a happy life. It is all within yourself." The myth of incompleteness obscures this truth, keeping people searching outward when the real work lies within. Breaking free from this myth does not mean rejecting love or connection. It means approaching them from self-sufficiency rather than need. When you no longer see yourself as a fragment waiting to be completed, love becomes a choice rather than a dependency. You can give freely without fear of losing yourself, and you can receive fully without making the relationship your source of identity. Such love is richer, deeper, because it is formed between two whole people who can each stand alone. Jung understood this. True connection can only occur when both individuals have confronted their own inner world, rather than using each other to avoid it. Choosing wholeness can feel lonely at first. Without the immediate validation of a relationship, you are forced to face yourself in full, your flaws, your strengths, your untapped potential. Most avoid this work, which is why dependence feels so tempting. But once you begin constructing a life complete on its own terms, something profound happens. The fear of being alone fades. Self-worth no longer fluctuates with the moods or opinions of others. Relationships you form are no longer attempts to fill a void, they are opportunities to share abundance. The myth of incompleteness is powerful because it has been repeated so consistently it feels like fact. Yet the truth is far simpler and infinitely more liberating. You are never half of anything. You are a whole, complex, capable being. The more you live from this foundation, the less you tolerate connections that require you to shrink, fade, or compromise your essence. You stop treating love as a remedy for your existence and start seeing it as a complement. Dependence fades. Individuality returns, and life becomes the creation of something whole on your own terms. Society celebrates milestones, marriage, children, houses, as proof of success, comfort, and predictability. Step outside that pattern, live fully single, and suddenly you're unpredictable. That unpredictability signals freedom, autonomy, and power, things the herd finds unsettling. When no one can predict your next move, it's because you set your own direction. You pivot, take risks, and chase opportunities without compromise. The herd may see this as instability, but for the outlier, it's freedom. People question your path because they measure life by conformity. Solitude becomes a luxury, a space where self-determination can thrive. Contentment alone disrupts the narrative, showing happiness isn't exclusive to the couple's lane. Unpredictability builds resilience. You are less shaken by change because your identity isn't dependent on others. Freedom comes from agency. The outlier explores life on their own terms, rejecting the idea that connection requires sacrificing individuality. Solitude sharpens creativity. Ideas flourish when there's no one to distract, judge, or influence. Your work becomes authentic, unfiltered, and entirely yours. Emotional independence transforms your inner life. You stop absorbing others' moods, stop rehearsing interactions, and start moving through the world with your own rhythm. Joy becomes self-generated, steady, and resilient. You learn to sit with discomfort, validate yourself, and cultivate calm. Relationships shift from necessity to choice. Love is shared from abundance rather than need. True sovereignty comes at a cost: solitude, responsibility, and confronting yourself without distraction. You learn to own both victories and mistakes. Freedom without ownership isn't real. Real freedom demands self-mastery. Dependence is often mislabeled as selfish or lonely, but it's proof you can live fully without constant validation. In this space, the ordinary becomes profound. Moments are savored, joy is internal, and creativity thrives. You are whole, steady, and alive. The greatest freedom is realizing you are already complete. Protect that truth, live by it, and let the world's indifference strengthen, not weaken you. Solitude reveals a strength that doesn't beg or explain, it simply is. Power begins when expectations die, and in that death, you finally become unshakable. Real life begins when you stop chasing validation. Most people hope their suffering will be seen, that someone will notice their pain, but life moves on. People are busy with their own chaos. If you build your identity on being seen, you'll always feel invisible. The truth is harsh but freeing. No one owes you understanding. The world doesn't hand out medals for endurance. That realization is the first step toward freedom. When you stop waiting for recognition, you start moving for reasons that matter, your own. Pain, silence, solitude. They aren't curses, they are teachers. Your inner world becomes your compass. You learn that being unseen is power. Carl Jung said, "Who looks outside dreams, who looks inside awakens." The moment you stop performing for others, you start becoming yourself. Healing isn't for applause. Sovereignty begins when you stop explaining yourself and start trusting your own judgment. Solitude sharpens clarity. Disappointment, rejection, misunderstanding, they become guides, not obstacles. You stop seeking permission. You stop tying your progress to others' presence. Self-reliance is built quietly, consistently. You act from integrity, not expectation. Strength is still, unwavering, unseen. Real power is choosing yourself, building in silence and letting results speak. Pain no longer deaf. Inays you. Solitude no longer scares you. You carry your life with quiet authority, knowing that your presence alone rewrites the room. It doesn't announce itself, but others feel it, in the way you speak, move, and no longer chase what used to pull you apart. Solitude sharpens your boundaries. You stop saying yes to avoid disappointing others. You stop engaging in conversations that drain you. You learn that no is not unkind, it's honest. Honesty, cultivated in silence, becomes a way of living. You don't need to prove anything. Your energy speaks for itself. Solitude shows the difference between imagined disasters and reality. It plants you in what's real. A sense of self grows, steady, clear, unshaken. When you return to the world, you come back deliberate, not distant. Your words and actions rooted in stillness. You're not easily swayed because you've built your ground moment by moment. The old self, the one that needed approval, bent to fit, performed to be liked, begins to fall away. That isn't failure, it's evolution. What dies makes space for something deeper, truer. At first, it's disorienting. The mask doesn't fit. Old patterns feel exhausting. You say less, but each word carries weight. You move with intent. You no longer perform to make others comfortable. You stand like a mountain, still, watchful, unmoved. People sense it. Some distance themselves, some question what changed. They feel your absence from their old expectations. That version of you needed to go so you could move freely, stop editing your truth, and live aligned with yourself. You no longer chase approval. You no longer need mirrors in others. You've found your own reflection, and it's enough. Change doesn't need announcements. You live it. Your difference is felt, not broadcast. Silence becomes strength. Absence becomes presence. You move without performing, because your growth was earned quietly in moments of doubt and persistence. You are no longer triggered by old patterns. You no longer seek to be constantly available. Loneliness becomes freedom because you realize you were never really tied to those roles, people, or spaces. You were tied to who you had to become to survive them. The old self earned gratitude, but its time is over. Now you stand clearer, stronger, unapologetically you. You move with quiet authority, no longer needing to explain, perform, or seek validation. True presence comes from how little you need to say, not how loudly. The depth of your stillness carries more weight than noise ever could. You faced your fears, walked through your pain, and returned without needing anyone's approval. You no longer bend to be digestible. You no longer hand out pieces of your soul for temporary comfort. You stand unfolded, unedited, letting life meet you where you are. People will come and go, but your foundation doesn't shake. You've stopped outsourcing your strength. Power is no longer given. It is built silently, intentionally, in the choices you make when no one's watching. You've become your own source. You no longer move for applause, recognition, or care. You move from alignment, clarity, and self-possession. You hold space for your emotions without leaking them into every interaction. You don't crumble when the world doesn't notice because you never depended on it. When you stop needing care, it's not loss, it's reclaiming. You've taken back the power to guide yourself. Walk through disappointment without folding, be unseen without disappearing, misunderstood without self-abandonment. That's when life begins to move in your favor, not because the world understands you, but because you've stopped needing it to. You don't need to be seen to become powerful. You don't need to be understood to become whole. The moment you stop waiting for the world to care is the moment you start shaping yourself into something it cannot ignore. Quietly, fully, unapologetically.